Hey guys, um, I realize that many of you have already seen the first part of this slideshow, but I just wanted to put it up here, one, because I didn't record it the other day, and two, because some of you guys have not gotten here quite yet. But here we go, Chapter 11, Section 1. So first off, when most people think of... Yes, sweetie?
What are you talking to?
Talking to my students, sweetie.
I want to talk to.
Okay, say hi.
Hi.
Good job. So most people think about Africa, they kind of think Lion King, something to that effect. And for the Victorian, um, for people in the Victorian era, this was kind of the same mentality. There was a big sort of Orientalism culture that focused on sort of the extremes and kind of the crazy stories. And so this is kind of what people thought of Africa. It was called the Dark Continent because Europeans hadn't really gone into the interior yet. Most of their experiences had still been kind of to the exterior, and so things are going to change. So here's the words that we need to pay attention to today. Imperialism, which is the domination of a country by another country politically, economically, and culturally. And what we're going to see happen is a lot of Africa is going to basically be put under the control of various European powers, and everything about them changed. Now, there was a number of motivations why the Europeans did this. Number one was raw materials. They needed resources, and Africa had a lot of them. Another one, strangely enough, was social Darwinism. The idea was that this was stuff that the white people needed, and so they deserved it, and they were going to go get it. But added into that was this mentality that they were actually doing the people living there a favor by bringing what they saw as more advanced culture, technology, that sort of thing. So it's almost this humanism effort, this humane efforts to try to make the world a better place. So what happened is Africa was a very, very big place with lots of different peoples. And in addition to that, all of the various European powers wanted Africa. And so in order to avoid a literal world war, the various powers met at the conference in Berlin in 1884. There, they ended up partitioning or breaking up Africa into spheres of influence, places that only one European power would go into. And actually, one of the things they did was to make certain that tribal enemies were in the same territory. This was so as to guarantee that they would not unify their forces against the Europeans and make them that much easier to conquer. It's the literal expression of divide and conquer. So this is a map of Africa superimposed with the spheres of influence. You'll see that the orange is France, and they have this big wide territory in the north and west. And when you compare that to, say, the British areas, they actually had more territory, but they had not as productive territories. And so I've seen a sort of a balance. Of course, you also have Spain, Italy, and I'd like to pay attention to Belgium, the Belgian Congo, right there in the dead center. The reason for that is Belgium was really interested in extracting materials and basically forcing the natives to do it. And they enforced this with pretty extreme measures. In fact, if you compare their reign to what groups like the rebels in the Congo and in Sierra Leone did to folks they forced working into diamond mines, it's essentially the same. It was not a pleasant experience. The natives were heavily oppressed, and it was going to be a bad situation all around. Also, you'll see that there's two independent countries in Liberia and Abyssinia, or Ethiopia. Now, Liberia was independent because it was actually set up by the United States, and none of the European powers wanted to start a war with the U.S. over this little tiny territory in Africa. The reason it was set up was in order to give the newly freed slaves a chance to live in a homeland of their own. However, many of the slaves... Hey, Harper. Many of the slaves, of course, had grown up their entire lives for generations in the Americas, so they had no real experience with living in Africa and chose to stay behind. But many did actually take up the opportunity to move to Liberia. Ethiopia had remained independent because of a king they had named Menelik II, who had actually begun modernizing their military as soon as he could. And that allowed him the power to fight off anyone who tried to invade him, namely Italy. You'll see that they were surrounded to the north in Eritrea and to the west of what is now Somalia.
Hello, Daddy, students.
Now, another couple of things, some people. Henry Stanley and David Livingstone, those are two people. David Livingstone was a priest who had moved into the interior of Africa for the purpose of bringing the culture to the natives. And Henry Stanley was an American reporter who tried to go find him years after he had disappeared and everyone lost contact with him. This journey has been sort of retold in a number of different ways because what happened is Stanley went through all these different places and eventually found Livingstone living as a native with the natives. And the famous first words he spoke to him was, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume." And what had happened with that was he had essentially gone native, so to speak. He started living with the natives as natives would do. And this sort of shocked the European mentality that they were just far superior. Why would anyone choose to go from being a civilized European person to going and living amongst the wilds? And so you see this time and time again, everything from the story in Avatar, which is essentially the same telling, to even like Disney's Pocahontas. So that's been told time and time again. And again, like I said, shocked the sensibilities that, that these natives weren't just inferior savages, but they had a culture and dignity all their own. Shaka was the king of the Zulu, and his kingdom is going to be one of the ones also able to resist the Europeans for a time. Now, what's going to happen there, though, is Shaka goes absolutely mad, but we'll get to that here in a second. What happened is there was a group of Dutch settlers in South Africa called the Boers, and they had settled in South Africa for years and had actually fought a few skirmishes with the Zulu, but eventually kind of worked out their differences and almost had an alliance with them. Then the English came and settled in South Africa and warred with the Boers, and what was known as the Boer Wars. The English won, pushing the Boers deeper into Zulu territory, and the Zulu responded by attacking the Boers. Now again, the Boers managed to work out some bit of an alliance, and eventually the Boers and the Zulu fought against the English. As the English tried to push up, they were defeated in a number of battles, largely because of British incompetence, such as the Battle of Isonzonde. And eventually, this alliance of Boers and Zulu was going to be destroyed because the English essentially got their act together and pushed as one considered group, and the fact that their greatest military leader, Shaka, went crazy. You see, Shaka had grown up in a tribe as essentially an unwanted son. Despite this, he managed to prove himself by being a military genius. He completely reworked the military system of the Zulu and was able to make it into a fearsome fighting force. But when his mother died, he went absolutely mad with grief and would execute people for laughing and things like that. So his, I think it was his cousin, but it could have been another brother, took advantage of that and killed Shaka and took his place as leader. But he was not as great a military leader as Shaka, and ultimately the English machine of war ground the Zulu down, and England took over what is now Zululand. This was the first meeting, allegedly, between Dr. Livingstone and Stanley. And again, this sort of moment of history. I think it's kind of interesting. You see all these different individuals there. The idea of Africans being like this savage people. Sometimes people fail to remember that there is a significant amount of Bedouins in Africa as well. So it's a multi-group people. This was Shaka, and one of the few drawings of him. Like I said, he completely revolutionized the military in Zululand and did a lot of different very interesting things. I'm going to show you guys a video of it later. But the thing is, the English had machine guns. This was the birth of the first fully automatic weapon. And that just gave tremendous advantages. When you consider the rate of fire for a musket, for a musket, you're talking about 3 aim shots in a minute. A repeating rifle like the Henry Martini, which is what you see here on the right, could get a higher rate of fire, over 10, 20 shots a minute. The Maxim gun, which is this machine gun you see right there, this guy sitting on, could get 600 rounds a minute. So effectively turning one man into an army into himself. We'll talk more about that later. Well, that's it, guys. That's all you need. We'll see you probably next week, since the snow looks like it's not going to stop. So until then, make certain you get the notes for this and be ready, because we'll move on to section 2 when we see you next. If you have any questions, save them for then. Take care.